Amid the turbulent tides of 11th century England, Edith of Wessex emerges as a woman of extraordinary intellect, political insight, and enduring cultural importance. As Queen Consort to Edward the Confessor from the years 1045 until his death in the year 1066, she bore witness to one of the most volatile chapters in English history, ultimately becoming the last Anglo-Saxon Queen of England. Though history often casts its spotlight on more dramatic figures of the age, such as her brother King Harold Godwinson, her husband King Edward the Confessor, and inevitably William the Conqueror, Edith's life offers a compelling glimpse into the intricate web of pre-conquest politics and the influential, if often overlooked, role of royal women. This is her story. Born in around the year 1025, Edith of Wessex was the daughter of Godwin, the Earl of Wessex, one of the most powerful and influential men in England, and his wife, Gytha Thorkelsdottir, a noblewoman of distinguished Danish lineage. Gytha was the sister of Ulf, a Danish earl and brother-in-law to King Canute the Great, which gave Edith ties to both the English and Danish power structures. From birth, she stood at the very heart of Anglo-Saxon aristocracy, shaped by a legacy of political might and noble bloodlines. Understanding the value of learning for a woman destined for a high station, Earl Godwin arranged for Edith to be raised and educated in Wilton Abbey, one of the finest centres of learning for noblewomen in all of England. At Wilton Abbey, Edith received an education that far surpassed what was customary for women of her time. She became fluent in 5 languages: English, Danish, French, Irish, and Latin, a rare and remarkable achievement that would later equip her to navigate the diverse and sophisticated court of Edward the Confessor. Alongside her academic studies, she mastered the traditional feminine arts of embroidery and weaving, skills deeply respected in Anglo-Saxon culture for their beauty, symbolism, and social value. Edith of Wessex lived through one of the most turbulent and transformative periods in English history. Her father Godwin had risen to prominence under the rule of King Canute the Great, the formidable Viking monarch who held dominion over England, Denmark, and Norway. Elevated to the powerful title of Earl of Wessex, Godwin became one of Canute's most trusted advisors, likely possessing deep knowledge of the inner workings of the vast North Sea Empire. But the stability of Canute's reign was not to last. In the year 1035, he died unexpectedly at the age of around 45, leaving behind a contested succession. His son Harold Harefoot took the throne, and Edith, then just a child of about 10, would have witnessed the uncertainty that followed. Harold ruled from 1035 until his death in the year 1040, after which his half-brother Harthacnut succeeded him. But Harthacnut's reign was short-lived. He ruled for only 2 years before meeting a mysterious end, poisoned during a wedding feast, his murderer lost to history. Through these years of shifting kings and uneasy alliances, Earl Godwin managed to retain his power and influence, skillfully navigating the political upheaval of successive Viking rulers. But with Harthacnut's death, the line of Canute came to an end, and so too did the era of Viking rule in England. Into this void stepped Edward the Confessor, son of the ousted Anglo-Saxon king Ethelred the Unready, the very man who had lost England to the Vikings. After nearly 30 years in exile, Edward was invited back to reclaim his father's throne. Thus, a new chapter began for England as the throne returned to the House of Wessex. Earl Godwin was instrumental in securing Edward the Confessor's return to the English throne. However, their alliance was fraught with personal animosity. Edward had long harboured a deep resentment toward Godwin, whom he blamed for the brutal death of his brother, Alfred the Atheling. Still, political necessity outweighed private grievance. Edward, lacking a solid power base of his own, was compelled to lean on Godwin's military strength and widespread influence. As part of this fragile political truce, Edith of Wessex, then 20 years old, was married to King Edward on January the 23rd of the year 1045. The king was roughly 42 years old at the time. Their wedding took place at the Old Minster in Winchester, and Edith was crowned queen. Most royal consorts of the 10th and 11th centuries were not granted this honour, and her coronation underscored both her personal status and the immense political weight of the Godwin family. The marriage between Edward and Edith was a union of power, not passion, and has long intrigued historians. It remained childless, leading to speculation about its true nature. Medieval church chroniclers, eager to portray Edward's pious image, claimed he had taken a vow of celibacy, casting him as a king too holy for earthly pleasures. Modern scholars, however, suggest other possibilities, that Edward's lingering hostility toward the Godwins led him to distance himself from Edith, or that infertility of one or both parties played a role. Whatever the truth, Edward treated Edith with outward respect. He bestowed upon her valuable estates across England and ensured her continued presence at court. As queen, Edith exercised real influence, participating in royal ceremonies and overseeing elements of administration. The uneasy alliance between King Edward and the powerful Godwin family finally shattered in the autumn of the year 1051, erupting into open crisis. Tensions had long been simmering, fueled in part by Edward's increasing reliance on Norman advisors. The breaking point came in September, when Edward ordered Godwin to punish the town of Dover, following a violent altercation involving Eustace of Boulogne, one of the king's Norman allies. Godwin and his sons defied the royal command, refusing to act against their own countrymen. Edward seized the moment to strike against the family that had overshadowed his rule for years. With the backing of the Earls of Mercia and Northumbria, he expelled Godwin and his sons from England, effectively dismantling their political stronghold. The downfall of the Godwins had swift and painful consequences for Edith of Wessex. Though she was a crowned and anointed queen, her royal status could not shield her. She was sent to a nunnery, her lands confiscated, and there is strong evidence that Edward contemplated divorcing her, perhaps due to the childless marriage, or more likely, as part of a broader effort to sever ties with her disgraced family. This episode of Edith's life lays bare the vulnerability of royal women in Anglo-Saxon England, whose power and position were often bound tightly to the fortunes of their male relatives. Despite her elevated status and years of service as queen, Edith could be cast aside when political necessity dictated. Yet her fall from grace would not last long. In the year 1052, her father Godwin and her brothers returned to England with a formidable fleet and military force. Confronted with the real threat of civil war and lacking sufficient support to resist them, Edward was compelled to restore the Godwins to power. As part of this reconciliation, Edith was reinstated as queen and returned to court, her titles and properties restored. After her restoration to court, Edith resumed her role as a central and commanding presence in the reign of Edward the Confessor. She took particular care in curating the dignity and splendour of the crown, overseeing the commissioning of exquisite garments and fine jewellery for Edward. Her power was not merely ceremonial. The Domesday Book, compiled some 20 years after her death by William the Conqueror, records Edith as one of the wealthiest landowners in England, with vast estates scattered across the realm. This wealth afforded her considerable political leverage, allowing her to dispense patronage, reward loyalty, and sustain a network of allies. Among her closest confidants was her brother Tostig, whose elevation to the earldom of Northumbria in the year 1055 was likely aided by Edith's influence at court. Their bond, however, would later cast a shadow over her legacy. Tostig's harsh governance provoked a northern rebellion in the year 1065, and some chroniclers whispered that Edith had played a dark role in an earlier scandal, the assassination of the Northumbrian nobleman Gospatrick during the Christmas of the year 1064. Such accounts reveal how Edith was perceived in her time not only as a queen, but as a shrewd political operator, willing to act decisively, even ruthlessly in defence of her family's power. In the final year of Edward's life, as his health declined, Edith's ceremonial role became ever more prominent. On December the 28th of the year 1065, she stood in his place at the dedication of Westminster Abbey, Edward's grand architectural legacy and spiritual offering to the kingdom. King Edward the Confessor died on January the 5th of the year 1066, setting in motion one of the most legendary and famous succession crises in English history. According to the Vita Edwardi Regis, a contemporary chronicle commissioned by Edith herself, Edward on his deathbed named her brother Harold Godwinson as his heir. The following day, the Witan, the King's Royal Council, confirmed Harold's claim and proclaimed him king. For Edith, these events marked a profound turning point. Though no longer queen consort, her brother's ascension to the throne ensured she retained honour, influence, and a central place in the royal court. But this new chapter in her life would be both brief and brutal. Harold's reign was immediately challenged by Harold Hardrada, the King of Norway, and William, the Duke of Normandy. The ensuing conflicts culminated in the Battle of Fulford and Stamford Bridge, where Harold Godwinson defeated Hardrada. However, at Hastings, fate did not favour him, and he was slain, and with him, the last great hope of Anglo-Saxon rule. For Edith, the Norman Conquest was not only a national upheaval, but a deep personal tragedy. She lost 4 brothers in the battles of Stamford Bridge and Hastings. Only her youngest brother Wulfnoth survived, doomed to live out his days as a hostage under Norman control. In the space of mere weeks, the mighty Godwin family, once the most powerful force in England, was shattered. When William's army advanced on Winchester, where she was residing, he sent emissaries demanding tribute. Edith, ever pragmatic and politically astute, complied. In return, William permitted her to retain the majority of her estates and income. This careful diplomacy ensured that Edith became one of the few Anglo-Saxon nobles to emerge from the conquest with her status largely preserved. One of Edith's most enduring legacies was her commissioning of the biography of her husband, King Edward the Confessor, a work known as the Vita Edwardi Regis, the life of King Edward who rests at Westminster. Composed in around the year 1067 by an anonymous monk from Flanders, this near-contemporary account is among the most valuable sources for understanding the final years of Anglo-Saxon England and the events surrounding the Norman Conquest. Far more than a simple royal tribute, the Vita was crafted to elevate Edward's piety and kingship, while also subtly reinforcing the legitimacy and prestige of the Godwin family. Its pages are clearly sympathetic to Edith and her kin, offering a counterpoint to the emerging Norman narrative that would come to dominate historical memory. In doing so, it preserves a vital Anglo-Saxon perspective on a kingdom in transition. Edith would die in the year 1075 in Winchester after a prolonged illness. She was around 50 years old. Though the Norman Conquest had changed the realm, William the Conqueror recognised Edith's royal stature and ensured she was laid to rest with honour, buried beside her husband in Westminster Abbey. Edith of Wessex holds a singular place in English history as the last queen of Anglo-Saxon England. Her life encompassed the reign of the Danish kings, the twilight of native English rule, and the dawn of Norman power, making her a living thread that stitched together three distinct eras. I would like to give a huge thank you to all of my members. Your contribution is valuable to the continuation of the channel, and I appreciate you all immensely. A special thank you to John Seitz. I hope you all enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to like, subscribe and share, and I'll see you all next week for another History Profile.